Liz Gomez is our guest today. She is a yoga instructor and the owner of A Journey Inward. I have known her for many years. I actually had the pleasure of working with her in corporate at one point in my life, and she's just a phenomenal human. And I'm so excited to share her with you today because she just has this calming presence. And even though you're not going to see her face on the video, you will hear her. And it's just the way she says things, the way she addresses certain situations, and the words that she says are so powerful. She just has such a calming but powerful energy and essence. And I hope that it translates across the video through the audio, the way that it affects me every time I get the opportunity to talk to her. She is so versed in yoga and breathing and a lot of psychological things as well. And today she's going to talk to us about her background, yoga, a lot of different things. The conversation just kind of goes wherever we take it, but I think you will find it incredibly beneficial. Hey, before we get started, if you are new here, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I hope you find this video helpful. And if you do, please give it a thumbs up because it lets YouTube know that we're out here and that we got all this good stuff going on. And for others who are looking for some sort of help or community answers, just information in general, if you give this video a thumbs up, if you comment on it, if you subscribe to the channel, it just lets more people know that we are out here. So without further ado, Liz Gomez, my friends. There we go. Yeah, so about a year ago, I know that when I think it might have been maybe a year ago when I saw you for the Thai yoga massage, and we sat and we talked about it. I was showing you, like, look at how flushed I get, and it's like my system just has this crazy response to whatever's happening, anything that happens on the outside of me. And I know every time I go and I get acupuncture, it's like as soon as he starts to put those needles in, my body just goes nuts because it's like there's an intruder here.
Right.
So part of that was, I talked to you and we were talking about even potentially PTSD in the body and a little bit about tapping therapy and just a little bit that we went over, but that massage was so great and helping things just move through my system. So earlier this week, I spoke with my functional neurologist to interview him in regards to overactive nervous system. And I think it's going to be really neat because what I'm doing with the videos is I'm doing these 2-week series where it's like a 2-week rundown of different research and information that I provide on the channel. And then the grand finale is this interview that will come out. So everybody's super excited about it. So I started the channel about a year ago just to start openly talking about it. And people just started flocking to the channel. I don't have it associated with me in my personal life at all. It's just, I just started putting it out there because it was something that I was really insecure about and wanted to be able to talk about it. And so right now I believe it's at like 222 subscribers, and they're from all over the world, people who are just really wanting a safe place to talk about it. I mean, like, people have committed suicide over it. People have just not been able to progress in their lives in certain areas because they can't find answers, and they feel like it really deteriorates them as a person because they feel like this outward look is telling a story about them, whether that's a true story or not. And what Dr. Deering was sharing, my functional neurologist was sharing, that when you talk about the overactive nervous system and how so many people experience a lot of these chronic stress triggers, that just doesn't show it as much. And so he was kind of going into a lot of his experience, even though he doesn't turn red or blush or flush. And so so much of what he was saying is a lot of breath work, a lot of body work. And I was like, this is setting us up perfectly for me to talk to Liz. Perfectly.
That's great.
So I told him, I was like, I'm glad you're hitting on this because I'm actually going to interview my friend Liz, who's going to talk all about this stuff, which is going to be great because they kind of go hand in hand. Some of the body work that he does, he is all for yoga and meditation. And that was a big one that he landed with at the end of our interview, was especially in these modern times. I mean, it's always been essential. It goes way back in the day, but for sure, people who could anchor to some meditation would find relief in their nervous system, period. So I just want to kick off with you to kind of tell us a little bit about your journey with yoga, how it sparked your interest, and just a little bit about your certifications.
Okay, well, my journey with yoga started almost 15 years ago. And of course, I was at a very emotional time in my life. I had 3 children, and I had moved to Tennessee from New York. My first marriage, was not in the greatest of situations. And so there was a lot of emotion when you pack up and leave, and you're really away from family and trying to figure things out. So I went to my first yoga class, and I thought, oh, I just need some additional stretching. I was an avid runner at the time, and so I said, I need to stretch out my muscles. I feel very tense. Um, and so what ended up happening is I met this yoga instructor who just started talking to me in Sanskrit, which is a very native language in India, and spoke of these 8 limbs of yoga, she would say in the class. And she would just reiterate different types of yoga premises throughout the class. And I thought over time, it just began to sink in. Like, I went to the class to hear the Sanskrit, to hear those repetitive statements that that most traditional yoga classes will repeat. And I found it very emotionally settling for me. And so every week I'd go about 2 or 3 times a week. And that kind of started me thinking, well, what am I missing? What am I not getting from this class that I should maybe take a training and understand more? So when I took my first training, which was many years later, divorced, remarried, it wasn't to teach, believe it or not. It was because I had learned all these just basic principles, I felt, and I needed to understand where they came from. What was the premise behind it? How much joy it brought to me, and how I could really understand that Far Eastern medicine. And that's what led me to my first certification, which was a 200-hour certification. I enjoyed it immensely. It lasted about 10 months. It was long hours and a lot of studying, but we covered so much of traditional yoga, from everything from just the subtle energy all the way through yoga poses, which, believe it or not, was the latter part of yoga invented. Yoga is a tradition that's over 4,000 years old. And I think, could be quoted wrong, but I believe the yoga poses came about after, I think, almost 3,000 years. Yoga is started out to be a meditation where the yogis would traditionally sit for days meditating. And what happened was they invented these asanas, they call them, simply because the younger generation, as it took up yoga, became very unsettled to basically sit there for days. So they created these asanas to help them get the blood circulating and then return to meditation. And so the basic premise of yoga is more mind-body connection. And then from there, I took my first Thai yoga training, and that brought me connected to the meridian lines and acupuncture and those acupuncture points, and understanding their connection in the nervous system, which helped connect the tapping study, which was first introduced in my first yoga class. By the time I got to my 500 yoga course, 500 hours, I was sold. I was absolutely sold that this medicine, this spiritual medicine, was very much where I wanted to go. I was not a big medical person. You won't see me visit a doctor. I generally look for the source of my issue, and then through repeated therapy, my own therapy, I will heal myself. I've gone through, as a runner, I used to run over 20 miles a week. I've pounded my body. I've injured both rotator cuffs to the point of pain where you can't hold a pencil with your arm hanging down without the ache in your shoulder. So from there, I was able to really kind of understand that natural therapy that you can do for your body. I have since healed both shoulders. One took about 8 months. The other took almost 2 years, just because of the severity of the injury, but it does heal itself. I do see a chiropractor regularly, and the chiropractor that I have is very much into more natural remedies, and to stay away from surgery and medication if at all possible. And so there's a motto that chiropractors have, and that's the power that made the body heals the body. And so it's a trusting in your own body's ability to heal itself, given the right circumstances.
Wow, that's incredible. So from your own experience to go through that journey on your own, and then what got you to a place of saying, like, I want to instruct, I want to lead this for other people?
I think it just came about naturally. After my first 200-hour class, my instructor was like, well, hey, what do you think you'll do with this? And I said, absorb it. That's it. That's what I want to do. I want to learn and I want to grow from it. I want to understand how it's going to benefit me. But then she kind of had me sub one of her classes. It was another 200-hour class, and she said, why don't you come and help me out by subbing for a few hours while I've got a conflict on my class. And so I met the new 200-hour students, and the questions and the eagerness from them was so exciting for me to be able to talk about those things that are near and dear. And I got to relive the 200-hour class through them. And that's what made me go, you know what? I shouldn't hold all this information in. I should really start telling other people and showing them all the things it did for me and what I think it can do for others.
Wow. And so what is and I know you and I have talked about this before, because even just at the end of me visiting you for the Thai yoga massage, we just sat there on the floor together for like 30 minutes. And I just asked you all kinds of questions because I felt like you had all these answers. I was like, tell me this, now tell me this, tell me this. And I was super relaxed. So that judgment factor of when you come in and you realize, you know, this is what's going to happen, really unexpected, not really sure everything that was going to happen, but it was so healing, just that. And that was like an intro. I think you were just doing like an intro to introduce people to what Thai yoga therapy can do. So can you tell what is the difference, if people aren't familiar with Thai yoga therapy, the difference between that and traditional yoga, I guess, and why that one's effective?
In traditional yoga therapy, your instructor is really assisting you to stretch and to focus your mind on the present moment. They're helping you engage your mind and your body in proper form and proper thought to help you disconnect from all the outside world, let's say, for just those moments that you're in that yoga class. There's some assisting and some help along the way, but for the most part, you are actively engaged in the process. In Thai yoga, you really become just, for all intents and purposes, not engaged. You're there to relax, and I'm there to properly instruct your muscles to do what I needed to do by following very traditional Chinese meridian lines, acupuncture points. I hit very specific areas to find the tensions that are really probably more stress related, that are showing up in your muscles. And I can feel those as I'm moving around on your body. And while hitting those meridian lines, they're trained to release those. Now, for some, like myself, who will carry certain stresses in certain areas, it becomes very obvious where that stress is. I was recently at I went to see my Thai therapist, who I trained with, who I learned from. And I spent 90 minutes with him just working on me. So I got to be the person on the mat. And I knew where all my stressor points were, but he's very much into, don't tell me what you're having problems with today. We'll just take it from there. And so I just laid down on the mat, and he found all the pressure points. I found a total release in those points. Having done this, I know how to inhale and exhale. So really the activity of the person on the floor is really just to follow my instructions of inhaling and exhaling. The whole session is very meditative. As you've known, it's very relaxing. And that was just an intro. So in 90 minutes, oftentimes I can't even cover the whole body, because I will focus on areas that I feel the most tension. And hopefully that leaves the person feeling very relaxed when they leave. It is a therapy that is recommended to go regularly, only because stressors happen, life happens. We all live every day in this world, dealing with work, family, just natural existence. So it's good to do that therapy every day, because it also, number one, it's kind of like a massage for 90 minutes, but better, I like to say.
No, I remember that because mine was an intro, you were kind of doing the whole thing, and you got to my shoulder and you were like, whoa. I remember at the end, you said, I wanted to save time for you to be able to have the other shoulder done, but this one, and it's the one that I'm constantly getting worked on. My functional neurologist, who I've worked with for 7 years, says as soon as you get wound up, that shoulder goes straight up. And the more that compacts and just continues to build up in that stress. And he always knows too, you're not breathing. When it gets super tight that way, you're not breathing through that and allowing that to stretch back out. And I think by the time I got to you, it was like after I think my dad's cancer diagnosis and the other things that have been going on. And when you got to that shoulder, just having me breathe through, you moving, it's your magic. I don't know all the technical terms for it, but whatever you did on the shoulder area, and to have me breathe through it, it literally was like life-changing and emotional. I felt so emotional too.
Yes. And oftentimes I do have clients who will actually cry during the therapy, just because it's not because they're upset. It's a natural emotion that they're releasing from their bodies. And that's obviously a foretold sign of the stress. Of where that's coming from usually is something emotional rather than physical.
And that's what is that something that if we're not taking that time for meditation, or we're not taking that time to really process thoroughly or properly, that it does get stored in our bodies?
Yes. So meditation is there's numerous studies on meditation and what it does to the brain. And it actually does calm the sympathetic nervous system, which is really what is causing a lot of the stress, muscle tension that is caused by stress. So if you think of it, the nervous system, and I'm sure your neurologist will tell you, is really the source of a lot of the medical conditions. So they say something like 90% of people who seek medical care are doing so as a result of stress-related illness. And so that tells you the connection between your emotional side and your physical illnesses. And so when I read that statistic, it was so astounding to me that in today's world, you think about all of the things that people are battling, and the emotional eating, the emotional just anger, all of that is really playing a role in our bodies and what is happening to our bodies, whether that's the blushing could be an emotional response. Obviously, it's caused by the nervous system reacting to a situation, or it's, ulcers. We all know that ulcers are caused by stress. I mean, that is a physical indication that you are under too much stress. I do believe that, kidney issues, all kinds of illnesses that we currently suffer from today are a direct result of stress. And we live in a very stressful society. Meditation kind of takes you into a different part of your brain, let's say. It's scientifically increases gray matter, which also helps the body kind of soothe that sympathetic nervous system that is causing all of that stress and the firing of those neurons. And then allows you to kind of be less reactive to what's happening around you. It allows you to step back a little more, that you're not as quick to respond to somebody who might say something to you, or any type of situation, a mother, a critical mother, a child that might, do something that all of a sudden you're ready to jump. So a regular practice of meditation, which they do recommend at least 10 to 20 minutes twice a day for meditation, to help kind of allow the body to calm the stress levels, could potentially ease a lot of those symptoms of stress-related illnesses.
Wow. So I wonder, so you and I talked about, when I saw you last, about, in particular with my blushing situation, which mine is chest and neck flushing. That wasn't always there. It kind of came up over time once I got into my late 20s and as I started climbing the ladder in corporate America. When I've talked to a lot of people who either deal with facial blushing or chest flushing of some sort, most of them, there's a certain moment when they remember it happening. And for some, it's when they were maybe in high school. And then some embarrassing moment happened and they turned red and somebody pointed and said, "Look at how red you are." And all the kids laughed. And so it seems like it's the same situation with adults who are having it, whether it's at work and they don't want their boss to see it and think that they're weak, or they're anxious or embarrassed or scared, or all the emotions that people tend to create the story for you instead of you being able to share it for yourself. And I know as you and I were talking through it, you said, "I'm curious to know if this is related to PTSD." And then when I was thinking about when you were saying that the body's ability to heal itself, is there any advice or just insight that you could give in regards to, because I would think that if this did happen where somebody pointed it out, that probably did create a PTSD moment. Because then what happens is then people start constantly obsessing over it. I don't want it to happen again. I don't want it to happen again. Becomes the term erythrophobia, which is not necessarily that you're blushing, but that you're afraid to blush. And so a lot of times it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and people they feel that they cannot turn their brain off. And even when they feel strong about it, like, I feel amped up today because we're trying to do it from our head. I got this today. But as soon as they feel themselves starting to get hot, that trigger happens and they're like, "Oh no, no, no." They start to resist. And then it makes it worse and worse and worse. And then they feel that they're now in the bottom, spiraling down, that they couldn't control it. So what feedback would you have for that?
Well, number one, I would definitely recommend meditation, because I do believe that you figure out the blushing or the flushing, the redness is obviously caused by the expansion of the blood vessels. It's causing a rush of blood to the area. And that's usually a direct result of the sympathetic nervous system being triggered. Guaranteed. And so when you think about PTSD, you can often think about it as, we talk oftentimes about muscle memory, say brushing your teeth. Everybody brushes their teeth. They go into the bathroom, they, put the toothpaste on, they put water on, and they start brushing their teeth. They can think about the day's activity. They can think about what the kids have to do today, what the spouse might have going on, or what do I have to do for my mother? Oh, I got to call this person. I've got to get this done at work. They can go through a litany of tasks while brushing their teeth and never think about it because of what they consider muscle memory. But what is in fact happening is that your neurons know what they need to do. Okay. You've told your brain, I'm going to brush my teeth. You go into the bathroom, the brain knows what neurons to fire to get those muscles to move. And the brain has taken over that activity. So now it's an automatic activity, doesn't need to think about it. In a PTSD situation, the same thing is happening, where your neurons are firing exactly as they have. They know the situation, they recognize it, they're firing the same neurons, and so the same reaction is happening. Whether you've been through a car accident or a traumatic moment in your life, no matter how small or how big anyone might think it is a memory that your brain says, oh, I know what's happening. I need to fire these neurons. Through meditation, we obviously ease that sympathetic nervous system from reacting as quickly. But in a PTSD situation, you have to break the cycle. And that's where tapping comes into play. So tapping uses acupuncture points. And you kind of come up with a catchphrase or something to help you through the situation, whether it's something powerful that kind of tells you in certain situations, like people who are in accidents or something, I am safe now. That was the past. I am not in that situation. I am secure and happy. And so whatever the catchphrase usually is, and usually we do it, I do it with clients who have been in certain situations. We tend to come up with that catchphrase. And then there's a points that you tap on your body as you're going through it. And there's like 6 or 7 points that you'll tap as you say that phrase repeatedly. What that does is that's actually breaking the firing of that neuron. As you've got that thought of that accident or that situation in your head, you're reiterating your safety or your situation, that positive phrase to help your brain reprogram. And then the tapping actually hits those acupuncture points that breaks the cycle of that neuron, stops the flow of those neurons firing. And it immediately starts easing that tension, because then you become less reactive. When those neurons no longer can fire down that path, the situation changes itself. It's no longer having an effect on you. Tapping was created by a gentleman called Gary Craig in 1993. He kind of came up with it. So it's a pretty old in the sense it's 20 years old, and he's actually done tests on war. Soldiers who have come back from war and who have been diagnosed with PTSD and severe PTSD. So we're talking the extreme violent outbreaks, unable to have relationships with people, just high stress, and probably on the verge of suicide in many cases. So he found that over a week's time, that situation dramatically changed through daily tapping regimens. Those people actually became less reactive to their situation. There's some very famous studies that he did with it on those PTSD victims, and it's incredible to watch. And as quickly as he was able to do it, and many of them have been in therapy for years and were unable to really kind of, whether through drug therapy or psychological therapy, they were really unable to stop the demons, per se, that haunted them repeatedly. So I was very pleased to see the outcome. And I do think people with anxiety and other types of stress triggers can really benefit from tapping.
Yeah, because that's something that I know when you talked to me about it, you said it could be a facial expression. It could be a trigger word. It could be all these different things that I'm not even aware of. And for me, the other day, and this happens almost every single time I talk to my boss. He's very kind. He's very supportive of me. He's never been just a royal jerk to me in the sense of, I feel like he's going to fire me in a second. But I think from my experience in my careers and my career over time is that the workplace is not somewhere that you trust. You do not trust the people who say they're your family. And so having a conversation with him, even if we're just having a productive conversation about something we're about to implement, I will get so red and hot. I mean, my nervous system just goes crazy, like danger, danger, danger. So trying to, in my head, have a legitimate professional conversation, but my body is saying, abort, abort, get away from this. It's dangerous. And so it's like, it is as if the head and the body are two totally different things. And that I'm triggered constantly. So I know that was one of the suggestions that you had made to me, is to look into the tapping therapy. Is that something that you offer? And have you been able to do that via Zoom?
I have been able to do it via Zoom through the therapy program as a recommendation for those with anxiety. I did have one client who had a car accident that was very stressful for her. And so we did some tapping in addition to other physical type work to help her body heal more naturally, because she did suffer some injuries from that car accident. So, but she was emotionally traumatized by it and often became very anxious every time she drove. So we kind of worked on tapping to help ease that anxiety and work through those issues. I do recommend you. I know you journal. I know you write. I would recommend really kind of honing in on what you're feeling at the time that those things happen, and really kind of get into the emotional side of what's going on at that moment, because that's what's causing it, and that's what's triggering your reaction to it. And so I can definitely tell you that once we hone in on what that emotional trigger is, and it's probably not him, it's probably something that's happened to you before, that you're remembering as you're sitting there talking. And that's more than likely. So that's why I'm saying, if you journal and really kind of explore your feelings at that point of what's happening, it's probably not something he's saying, but just the mirror situation, something that's happened perhaps in your past that you're remembering was really traumatic for you, sitting down with someone who was your superior, and that you're reliving while you're sitting down.
Yeah, I absolutely think because when I try to figure it out in my head, I'm like, it doesn't make sense. But then when I think about just my whole history in the workplace, and then when I think about also in childhood with my mother, even though it wouldn't be something that's majorly traumatic according to comparisons, but in my world, if you performed well and there was a good reaction out of her, then in my head as a kid, that means love and safety and support and all those different things. If mom's in a mood, then my identity, I think, was kind of thrown around until we could anchor back to, I am approved. She sees me. I'm out of that judgment, and we're safe now. And so that is what I usually, when I have journaled about it before, it goes in any situation where there's somebody who is superior, as you said, and especially when I feel they hold power over me. So even in my head, when I try to tell myself, you are choosing to work here, you are choosing to be here, it's still that authority figure who, at the end of the day, if he says, I don't approve of you, then I'm done at that point. And I think it really, I noticed in my own story and in some of the people from the community who I've talked to, it seems like the inner layer of it all is, at the end of the day, will you accept me?
And I think from that, I also hear some chakra work that could be done, especially on your lower two chakras, your root chakra and your sacral chakra. Just by hearing that, I hear that there is perhaps some stability or grounding issues that need to be further explored and strengthened. And then, of course, some creative anxiety that also might need to be strengthened. Not that it's bad or missing, but that you could use some strengthening of those chakras as well. And yoga poses, as well as meditation, where we focus on those chakras and where there's mantras and energy levels that are focused on those chakras, would really help kind of strengthen those. Because I think as you strengthen those, you'll feel less anxiety in front of an authority figure. And then, of course, that will also alleviate the flushing.
Wow. And I think because that's a big thing for me, and you and I have talked about this before, where I'm like, if I could just get out of corporate, but it's almost like in my mind, I believe if that authority figure, if my boss is a client rather than an actual boss, then in my head, I am the superior one. And I remember even as a kid, I kind of was always the person that it's hard for me to connect to other people who are very, very strong leaders. And if I do, we're not super close. We kind of do our own thing on two different paths and we respect each other, but it's rare that you'll see me connect to another very strong person, especially a woman. It's more of, I'll just do my own thing. I'll do my own thing over here. So I
Right.
definitely think that, in talking to you, and it's funny too, because every time I talk to you, it's like, we're not even talking about this part yet. And I just want to start like, just your voice and like the frequency of your voice makes me want to start crying right away. I'm like, I don't know, Liz, tell me all the things. What's wrong?
Well, definitely the root chakra, which is the chakra that it's the physical chakra. So it maintains the body, as well as it's the grounding and stable chakra. And you figure that it's the bottom. It sits at the bottom of the spine. It's meant to hold you up. And that's why it's considered grounding and stable. So if that chakra is if there's a weakness, and I don't like using the word weakness, but more of a deficiency in there for whatever reason, you're obviously going to be less stable in certain situations, causing your emotional. I believe, with the 7 chakras, I believe the upper chakras, which are more the emotional chakras, tend to come into play when the lower chakras, which are more the physical chakras, are out of balance. So if you think about like the sacral chakra, that's your creative, your sexual chakra. It allows you to express yourself in very different ways. If there is an issue there, think about your throat chakra, which is your voice, becomes also out of balance because the sacral chakra is out of balance. So they kind of play together in many ways. And so when you look at the root chakra and you think about stability and being grounded and rooted in strong base, you can also take a look at it and go, wow, there could be a heart chakra issue where you've experienced an emotional trauma, whether that's family or just, in life, love interest or something. A divorce, per se, could also have an effect on that heart chakra and cause that out of balance. And then, there's countless of ways that you could relate the different chakras together. When one is out of balance, there's usually another one as well that's feeling the effects of that out of balance. So I would definitely explore those 2 lower chakras and see where that leads you as far as meditation, grounding exercises, as well as mantras and journaling. Because I think journaling, obviously, you do a lot of journaling, will help you explore that stability and that grounding and feeling I'm safe, I am secure, I am strong, and and I understand my convictions. And I think that when you do that, I think that the stronger those become and the more in balance they become, the more confident you become and the less reactive an authority figure will have. because obviously from a person-to-person standpoint, you are equal in every way. And I think it's just that confidence level could help. And then I think that's a lot of people, though. I think a lot of people experience not as strong confidence. They may be strong people, but become less confident in front of an authority figure. As confident as I am, I can often feel less confident in front of an authority figure. I tend to get a little quieter. I sit a little more in the corner, and I tend to not speak as much. But
Yeah.
I do.
It's like it makes you question. When I get around authority figures, it makes me question myself, and I don't live my life that way until I'm around authority figures. Then I overthink who I am and what I'm going to say, and was that right, and did I, because of that fear of how I was going to be perceived, which also speaks to, and then if I flush, then they can physically see something, which is what I'm trying to avoid with them, period.
And of course, you know me, my biggest fear is that I say something I shouldn't say.
You can't take it back. I see why you hide in a corner quietly.
It comes out of my mouth, it's out. There's nothing I can do about it. So my biggest fear is that I say something I probably shouldn't say. So I'm very aware of my roots there. And that I tend to be a no holds bar type of person. So I sit back a little bit and take it in. I listen more when I'm in those types of meetings, when I'm in board meetings or I'm in meetings with people with a lot more authority over me. I will listen more. But when asked a direct question, I am pretty confident in my answer and will answer boldly and honestly. So that's where that grounding and the stability does show itself. But until that point, I generally sit back and listen.
Yeah, I've noted, and I will say that that's something that actually working with you and then being around you outside of work, it actually has helped me to see. I think there's something in a sense of women, especially women, who they don't tend to have that filter. And especially when it's on the side of justice and just making things better, but not dampering it to get approval from anyone else. When I look at someone like you or other women in my life who I've seen with very similar strength in that area, it's encouraging to me to see, well, they did it. But, but it's almost like we create this storyline of who we are. I've almost been with my company 3 years where I'm like, if I start doing that now, then they're going to be like, what the hell's wrong with her? But there's also a time where, and this has happened in multiple companies, and I think this probably plays into a lot of my own situation, where that moment comes where it's like, this is an absolute no for me, and then I'm not quiet. So it's very much, this is absolutely not okay, it's not right, and here's why. And which usually leads to me not being employed anymore because I did speak up in what I felt was not right. And it's kind of that moment of, if this cost me my job, it cost me my job. But to see other people too, because we've created that story in our head. And I know that I can't remember who I was talking to that shared, it's very similar to what you said about brushing the teeth. And I think that's such a great visual or when we're driving sometimes and we don't know how we got where we got, because we take that same route all the time and we're like, how the hell did I get here? And I was thinking about so many other things or not thinking at all. Just knowing that I knew how to get there, even though I wasn't fully there at the time. And I think that's a great visual to show. We know that happens in those moments and so many routine moments that if our bodies have taken over, the brain is everything's taken over. Hey, this is one of those moments, make this happen. And what it leaves people with is this sense of, I have failed because this is happening. And it just dampers them completely. So what would you say, either from, meditation, breathing, I think they pretty much go together. But even if somebody's in a moment of that, their body's having that fight or flight reaction and they're in it, it's happening. Would you suggest in that moment they start some breath work to try to get their system to calm back down? Or because my understanding is once you have that fight or flight trigger, it has to run its course. But what would you say from your experience anybody could do in that moment to try to somehow get control over that or go with it or whatever they would need to do?
I would, number one, suggest to anyone that's in that moment to not be so critical of yourself. Okay, that's number one. Because it's a normal reaction that you're having. You're human, and thousands of people are just like you, so you're not any different. That's the first thing that I would say. The second thing I would say is work on a catchphrase. Something that will immediately put you in a calmer thought, let's say. So something that makes you happy, something that brings you joy, something that brings you a calmness that helps your brain to shift gear. Because what's happening in that moment is you've keyed up those neurons to start firing. And if you change your thought process, you're going to change the neurons that are firing. And so I would work on a phrase or some sort of statement, some sort of thought that gets your brain to shift what it's thinking about in that very moment. And I know it's hard because you're thinking about that moment, but if you can think of something that makes you happy, or, you know, whatever the situation, a memory, if you can recall that at that moment, you're going to retrain the brain. Because the brain is, of course, it's the center, it's the mecca, the engine that's running the whole thing. And so you have to shift gear for all intents and purposes. You know, if you're in fourth gear, you got to bring it down to 3. And in order to do that, you've got to move. So that's going to take a different change of thought. And that's what I would recommend. If breathing is, oftentimes people don't think I'm going to breathe because they're holding their breath at that particular moment. And it's hard to get them to go, okay, just exhale. But if you can train yourself to go, I'm getting heated, let me think about, you know, my puppy at home who's so playful and joyful. Your brain automatically changes its focus. And when it changes its focus, it's going to stop firing those neurons and it's going to start firing these other ones. Because it's going to have your body's going to have a different reaction when you think about a different memory.
Right.
And you're going to fire different neurons. So if you can begin to start moving in that direction, you start controlling more of your thought. There's a gentleman who, a doctor, he's a chiropractor. His name is Joe Dispenza. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Oh, yeah.
But he wrote the book, Evolve Your Brain. And in that book, he talks about the power of thinking, really. What you can do with your brain is absolutely astounding. The studies that are done with various control groups. And he talks about one study where they had these several bars of piano notes. And he took a group of, I think it was 24 people, 3 different groups. A control group that was 8 people, 8 people in the second group, and 8 people in the third group. And so he took the third group and taught them how to play the piano, those set of bars. And so repeatedly for several weeks, I think, every day they would play those bars, twice a day or something. The second group, he taught to listen to the bar so they could hear it and just play those same tunes over and over again for the same amount of time as the first group. The third group, he did nothing, left them. So they did brain scans on them before they started, and then they did brain scans on them after the 2-week period. In the first group that physically played the piano, they could see changes in the brain, where those changes were, what neurons were firing, etc. In the second group that never touched the piano but just mentally played it, they saw the same changes in the brain as the first group. And then the third group, of course, there was no change in brain activity. So that tells you right there that you don't have to physically be doing something to change the brain's activity. When we learn something new, we create new neurons in the brain. We fire new neurons. You know, they say, well, you know, your brain is set at a certain age. That's not true. You can actually change the brain through time. Learning how to ride a bike, you fire new neurons. Learning a new song, learning how to play the guitar, learning when you read a book, you're learning different things and you're firing different neurons. So there's so many activities that we do every day. And if we're open to learning more, then we change the makeup of the brain. We can change bad habits to good habits, in which case, when you move away from bad habits, those neurons that once used to fire no longer fire, and they kind of shrivel up, and the new neurons are formed. So the ability of the human to change the brain's makeup is incredible, and it's beyond space and time, if you think about it, what we could do for ourselves if we're just willing to think through and really change that makeup. So if I could get a client to think about a positive thought during those times, I would definitely go that route, because those situations are going to occur. The key to them is to no longer fire those neurons. And tapping will also help, and meditation will help. And all of those situations will help, as you know, as well as making sure that you've identified what those triggers are. Nice. Will be a huge help.
Do you think that the journaling is what can really help somebody uncover what the triggers are?
Absolutely. I think because we're all different, and everybody's going to have different things that kind of get them emotionally involved in a situation that might be stressful. So I think it's important that when the stress trigger happens and you feel that reaction of the body, that obviously you're not going to sit down and journal right there, but afterwards you can sit down and go through what caused it, like whether that was an argument that was having, or someone said something and you remember going, oh my gosh, I can't believe that person said that. And just dissecting the situation that had occurred would be a huge help, not only, you know, to who's ever, you know, as far as a therapist, for myself to identify, but also for the person themselves. So I think a lot of people go through not really understanding why it's happening.
Right. Right. That's one of the things that when I do CBT for cognitive behavioral therapy with people, and this is what I love about your line of work too, because it's especially with the Thai yoga, what I've experienced with that, it was more of a body work, which is a whole different element. But to get people to start thinking through why and asking questions that really allow them just to answer their own questions, which is truly all that the CBT practitioner does, is just keep asking questions until they eventually answer their question with their answer. And then they're like, I figured it out. It's similar to journaling. And I'm curious to know if you think that, I don't know, it might've been Joe Dispenza who I heard say this about, if you would sit and have some visualization moments of things that you know blow you up once you've identified it through your journaling. If you were sitting, not necessarily I don't know, I know that there's different ways that sometimes in our culture, we think meditation is I was sitting there thinking, and that's not what meditation is. But if you were sitting there and you're having some visualization of, when I talked to my boss today, if this happens, here's what I'm going to think about, like the puppy. And instead of being in the moment, and then you're like, shit, I can't think of anything other than this right now. What was I supposed to think about? But if you practiced it in your visualization or in your meditation moments, do you think that would be helpful?
Absolutely, because that would be my next suggestion. Once we come up with that visualization or that thought, that memory, is to practice it like you're in that situation. Oh my gosh, relive it and think about that moment and watch how the body reacts. And the more practice you get at doing it, the more on the fly it becomes. Remember, because it's the neurons that are going to fire. And what you'll train your body to do is it'll, instead of firing those neurons for the body to react, those neurons are going to get triggered at that memory, and it's going to automatically move you to the memory that you've practiced. So instead of going, to point A when I'm triggered, I'm going to go to point B when I'm triggered. So I'm going to go up, and then I'm going to come right back down. And that's what you're really doing. You're training your brain to go, nope, I don't want you to go over here. I want you to come over here. And I'm going to practice that repeatedly until I get that. It's kind of like the piano. I'm just going to practice it until I fire those neurons. And that's what you're basically doing. In meditation, the idea obviously is not to think. It's basically to remove all thought in meditation.
So it's a different practice when you're having visualization versus meditation.
Which is why I can't say go into meditation, because that's not the whole purpose of meditation. So what we need to do is retrain the neurons firing in the brain, and through practice. And whether that's, I haven't had this situation yet, but whether I have a therapy client in front of me and I play that role of starting to say things to them, and then they learn to shift gear, that would be definitely part of the therapy that I would work on.
So it sounds like we're almost having two different things we're talking about. When we talk about like meditation and breath work, that's almost like you're being proactive and preventative and letting the system calm, teaching the system to calm, and because you think about how often we're up late, we get up early, a lot of us for work, we're glued to our electronics, we've got home stress, work stress, bill stress. And if we're not taking that time, and I think for some people, they think, well, I did take a bath for some self-care, or I read a book for some self-care, but not actually going into meditation, which is to just let it not be in the bath thinking, or not having a couple of glasses of wine and trying to detach by having some alcohol. Guilty here, but then but allowing yourself to actually be alone. Have you learned in your history with this that maybe a lot of people they don't want to be alone, and that's why because I feel like I've met a lot of people who resist this type of therapy. When you can tell, we hear this everywhere, and you can read about this anywhere you look when you go to calm the nervous system, and yet we'll go explore medication and surgeries instead of really spending time in this area, or we don't give it long enough. What do you think kind of deters people from sticking to a meditation routine?
An out of balance root chakra. It's that grounding, it's that stability you feel more stable around people than you do by yourself. And so it's that lack of confidence, perhaps at certain times, that you need to build up and bring that root chakra back into balance. Because being alone, obviously, for those of us that love that solitude when we get it, like myself, it just makes everything okay. Whatever happens, it just makes it okay. I get to spend time journaling by myself. I get some time reading. I get to sit in meditation, or I get to go for a walk, and I don't need to think about what's happening. It's just my time. You can do that in a bath, but I find that there are people that I even know that, the thought of being alone is, oh my gosh, it is definitely a root chakra out of balance in that sense, a sacral chakra out of balance, even a solar plexus out of balance. So there is a lot of fear in those statements of being by themselves. And whether that's, I don't know, maybe they were locked in a closet as a child, maybe they were, left in a room or left at home by themselves, and they really didn't want to be, and their parents thought that they were old enough to be home alone, but they didn't feel confident enough to be home alone. There's all different reasons why being alone could trigger that. And obviously it's a trauma. It's a PTSD, just like any other, that needs to be looked at. And it's not as severe as war, but it is a trauma that perhaps didn't really see themselves as trauma when it happened. But I definitely feel that is an issue to be explored.
So if you have somebody who is listening and they say, I want to, you know, because we get super hyped now. Like, I heard this, I'm inspired. I'm going to start meditating for 30 minutes a day. But it's from my own experience of it, it's like an exercise. So to sit for 30 minutes, if you have not been practicing, is torturous.
Yes.
So how would you suggest for people who are just like amped up now, I'm going to do it? What would you suggest their first step be?
I think their first step is it's like baby steps. We want to put on the training wheels first before we get on the bike, and we want to learn how to ride the bike with the training wheels. And so I would start with a 5-minute stint and that is hard for some people to sit still for 5 minutes. But number one, you have to be comfortable. I don't suggest laying down because you might fall asleep, but that's okay if you do. I do suggest sitting up, but on a comfy couch or a chair, something comfortable where you can feel relaxed enough to sit there for 5 minutes. Set a timer and drop the expectation is rule number one. Don't have any expectation of what miraculously is supposed to happen. Don't think, oh my gosh, you know, I'm going to suddenly be enlightened after 5 minutes. It's not it. That thought should never come to mind, because I think people sometimes go into meditation thinking, okay, what's supposed to happen?
Right.
And
what am I going to get from this? What cool things going
right.
to happen? Yeah. We
Like,
constantly want to be stimulated. Give me something.
and the idea is nothing's supposed to happen. You're not supposed to, nothing is absolutely supposed to happen. And so if you just sit there and focus on breathing, I do recommend, you know, an equal ratio breath, which is simply just for a count of maybe 4 or 5, breathing in, hold it for 2 counts, exhale for 4 or 5 counts, and then do that cycle again and focus on that breathing. Now, in every situation, for every person, your mind is going to wander and go, did I remember to shut the stove off? Or did I remember to pack the kids' juice box in their lunch today? You know, something is going to come up in your brain. That's okay. Just flow with it. Return to the breath. Go, oh, I need to focus. Back to the breath I go. And I recommend starting there, and forgive yourself is number one. If you don't spend the whole 5 minutes just focusing on your breath, don't worry about it. That's not there is no expectation is rule number one. Don't go into it with an expectation. Nobody should have an expectation. Nobody expects you to have an expectation. So that's rule number one, and probably the most important rule is it's okay to. And if you spend the whole 5 minutes and all of a sudden realize that you stopped focusing on the breath after minute 1, that's okay. Because when you come back to it the next day and you do your next 5 minutes, you'll go, okay, no, maybe I can focus on the breathing for 2 minutes this time instead of, you know, my mind wandering. And you'll get better at it each time. But as long as you don't have that expectation of what's supposed to happen, you won't be disappointed or feel down that it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And
I appreciate you saying that too, because I think that's a lot of just what I've heard from multiple people, and myself included, is that we hear about these really great meditation experiences. And I know for myself, I have had some cool moments, but that it's very rare. And I almost feel like when you sit down to start meditation, it's like swimming through sludge. It's like there's this, I got to do this, I got to do this, just like you would if you're not used to working out. It's all the reasons why you couldn't and shouldn't. But I did take that advice to do just a few minutes. But I've had moments when I've built up the muscle, you know, for lack of better words, inside of those experiences, and have had really, really cool moments. And I tend to like those types of quote unquote weird things that happen, because you can only, for me personally, I've only ever tapped into that in those types of moments. But there's so many times where you're sitting there and you're like, okay, when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? You just want some stimulation. Like, when's the cool thing going to happen again? So then you try to force it, which is not the whole purpose at all.
That is correct. And you don't, and that's why I said, always remember and repeat it to yourself. I have no expectations. I'm just here. This is my 5 minutes of just focusing on breathing, or because as many times as I've meditated, and for as long as I've been doing meditation, I don't have the same experience twice. So my mind wanders and I think about those things, or, or there's a sound that occurs. Like if I'm inside my house, somebody's, outside, there's kids outside yelling, playing basketball or something. Or I try to do it on my back deck. I have a nice covered porch and I'll sit outside. It's a beautiful Sunday morning and I could smell the fresh air. And so I'll sit and I'll try to meditate for a little while and someone starts a lawnmower. So these things happen. So I want everyone to realize that life happens in those moments and you just roll with it. That's it. Just and then when you remember, move back to the breath. And that's it. That is your only expectation is, okay, when I wander, I'm just going to go back to the breath and not be critical of yourself.
Love that. That's great advice too. And so I guess in closing, what I ask everybody who I interview after hearing a little more about some of the blushing and flushing, which essentially they're the same thing, just different parts of the body, some of the struggles and the realities for people who absolutely it's such a debilitating situation for a lot of people. My biggest thing that I talk about on the channel is awareness, support, and a little bit of talk therapy to move through it, like opening up to somebody and sharing with them. This is something that I am very insecure about. And then also we've been talking more about body work, breath work, and other solutions, because people are looking for a solution. Like we want a solution. And what I've been speaking about over the past 6 months is honestly, the cure that we're looking for is not out there. Because it's an internal reaction. It's something internally that is creating a response inside of our body that then is coming on the outside. But what would you say from just hearing about some of this stuff and from your expertise to encourage someone who stumbles upon the video because they're looking for some sort of answer or solution? What would you say to them?
I would say the power that made the body heals the body. And so if you think about everything that you are built with within you, you are built with one of the most advanced endocrine systems ever. You have the most powerful nervous system ever created, circulatory system. That body that you are walking around in has everything it needs to make you feel good. And so all you need to do is really kind of work on, what do I need to trigger those systems to make me feel better? And that's really just, I think it's more subtle energy than anything modern medicine can provide. Yoga is a 4,000-year-old practice. It predates modern medicine by thousands of years. It is still practiced and still taught in all parts of the world. And I will be attending my first trip to India in the next couple of years. I'm going with a group to do a retreat there where we will study more in depth and I get more hands-on with some of these practices. But I do believe for all of those people out there who are looking for some help, understand that is within you. It's kind of like, I think sometimes, and I mentioned this to a client, I said, think of Dorothy, where she searches and she searches for all these places, and what she was looking for was right at home. So if we can really focus our energy on ourselves and what we have already, I think we'll find what we're looking for. It's within us.
Wow, that's incredible. And so if somebody once I have this posted, what I will do is I will put all your information, your A Journey Inward information inside of the description. And just so if anybody was interested in working with you, especially now that we're in a virtual scenario for a lot of people, and a lot of the people actually who follow along with Blushing Phoenix, it's international. So there's a lot of people in different parts of the world that have connected within the community, and there's a lot in the US as well. But if they hear from you and are like, you know what, I'm interested in actually meeting with her, talking with her, and maybe doing some work through some of your therapies that you offer, what would their first session, depending on whatever therapy they're looking for, but what would that look like for them if they're thinking about reaching out to you to work with you?
Well, in their first session, I usually send a questionnaire that kind of allows me to understand any physical or emotional situations that are going on in their life, any surgeries, just kind of understanding what's happening with them. And then we meet, we discuss, we talk about those types of issues or situations, emotional issues, and we kind of go over a few things that I might have jotted down after I read their questionnaire. And that allows them to get a feel of what direction I might be heading, and allows me to understand a little more in depth, because when you actually explore some of the topics, it allows me to really get in deep. Like when you're talking about the situation with your boss, then I heard different things from you that allows me to go, okay, well, I see a root and a sacral chakra. So that allows that my mind to actually explore a lot more of that subtle energy. And then from there, we kind of lay out a plan of what that therapy might look like. How many times, how comfortable they are with it, and what I'm suggesting in those therapies, whether that's some physical yoga practice or what have you. And then from there, we kind of begin that plan as frequency as needed. Some of the practices, obviously doing this through Zoom, oftentimes I demonstrate so they can see me, I can see them. We kind of walk through the moves. I'm not physically there where I can adjust their position, but I kind of do it through Zoom, kind of focusing on alignment if that's the issue. Some of my clients do have arthritis, so alignment is pretty important. So I work very hard in focusing on those, where their feet are at the time, and making sure they're in the perfect alignment in order to achieve the best results.
Wow. That is, I know everybody's had to adjust to, especially in a physical therapy, like how do we work through this? But I think it's also taken away, when people think about, well, I have to do this and I have to go travel, it's taken away some of the excuse as well for people to get a good head start for, when we start to be able to come together more in the future. People have taken, I think from what I've seen, just from my own experience, I've seen people take more responsibility, I guess, over trying to make sure that they're the best version of themselves that they could be. And even the virtual opportunities have opened up, taken away excuses for people to be able to be like, it's all I got to do is just sign up and then have the conversation and then go from there.
Yes. So, and I'm able to do some, back to doing Thai. We're doing all COVID protocols. So I've bought all new sheets and pillow casings, and we've got all disinfectant. So we are doing all these protocols for Thai, because unfortunately I can't do Thai through Zoom. I can do most of my yoga therapy, but Thai through Zoom doesn't actually work.
Right. Thai is definitely one that I would highly recommend, and that has been very beneficial for me in just the one setting that we had. But I was curious to know, with everything going on, if I mean, obviously you can't say, and now push on whatever you feel on the back of your shoulder. It's not going to have the same effect. I want you to do it. You're good at it.
That's absolutely true. We did have to take some time off, and I did have to come up with a plan as to how I was going to really kind of make it safe and COVID free for everyone to feel comfortable in the situation. So I've invested some time and effort and some money on making sure that I can change out the sheets on the mats and spray down any equipment. As you know from Thai, my spray down is really me. I use various disinfectants on myself to make sure that I'm always cleansing before the next client, washing my hands. And so they feel comfortable as well. I do have, I do wear a mask, and I ask the client to wear a mask. And so it's working out so far, knock on wood. We're doing really well.
That's fantastic to know. And Liz, thank you again so much I know that I don't take it lightly ever if somebody spends an hour and 15 minutes with me to discuss things that are just so, I know, close to your heart, and I think will be really helpful. I mean, I had fun. I'm like extracting all the information. I was looking at my notes over here and I'm like, wait, what was I supposed to be asking for everybody else? But they all relate. We all relate to each other in this situation. So, and I think they truly enjoy the more conversation style anyway. So it's just been really great to talk to you and hear just a lot of these treasures that you know and hold, and to be able to speak to those. And I think that people are going to find this very beneficial when I have it up and running. I'm doing 2-week series on different topics. And I have yours scheduled, I think, a few weeks out from here. I want to say it's near the end of December. But once I have this will be an MP4 file. And once I have it completed and all, packaged up, I'll send you a copy of it just so you'll have it for whatever you ever want to use. If you ever have a client who has some issues with flushing or blushing, you can say, I did a great interview on this. Here, listen.
Great.
So I'll send it over to you for you to work for any marketing, or you can have for any marketing materials or anything you want in your future. And then I'll also let you know once I have it posted and send you a link to it. Sometimes people will jump in and start to ask questions inside the comments, but I'll also have all of your information in there. So if you start getting messages from people from all over the world that are asking questions, you'll know where they came from, because I'll tell you it's going live, and it usually goes live on a Sunday at 8 a.m. So I'll let you know
Perfect.
when I have it all up and running. But thank you again so much. I really, really appreciate it. And this was so beneficial just for me. So I know it's going to be great for everybody else.
Well, thank you so much, April. I enjoyed having this conversation with you. And as always, I always enjoy talking with you.
Thank you. Well, have a good rest of your evening, and we will talk soon.
Yes, you too.
Bye, girl.
Bye.
Ugh. She's just so good, right? I really hope that you found this time with Liz very helpful. I hope that it was encouraging to you. And if you'd like to get in contact with Liz, if you would like to know more about her, I'm going to leave all of her information in the description box below. And I would highly encourage you to take her up for some of her virtual offerings if you're not local, because probably a consultation with her would just blow your mind. Thank you all for tuning in today. Again, be sure to give it a like if you liked the video, subscribe, and leave comments below about what spoke to you in the video. Have you tried yoga in regards to your blushing before? Share some of your information and feedback here. And until next time, I'll see you all in my next video.